There comes a moment in every awakened life when the universe stops distracting you and begins dismantling you. It doesn't knock politely. It walks into your mind like a sudden storm, knocking over everything you once leaned on for comfort. And the strangest part is, you don't even realize what's happening at first. You just wake up one day and something is gone. The taste of life, the spark that once followed you everywhere, the subtle joy that used to rise with the morning light. It all feels like it has evaporated. The music that once filled your chest with electricity now feels like sound waves hitting a wall. The things you used to love now feel far away, as if someone quietly removed the flavor from them overnight. Life becomes strangely muted, like the world is still moving, but you're no longer moving with it, and the first thought you have is disturbing. What's wrong with me? Why can't I feel anything anymore? You panic, because joy was one of the last things you trusted. It was your compass, your anchor. And now even that has slipped through your fingers. You start thinking maybe it's depression, maybe it's burnout, maybe something in your brain has short-circuited without telling you. But what if nothing is wrong? What if the loss of joy is not the death of something, but the birth of something else? What if the universe isn't taking something away from you, but preparing you for a form of experience you've never known before? And what if the reason you feel like a ghost drifting through your own life is because the version of you that depended on old pleasures is quietly dissolving? Most people never question their joy because they've never truly understood it. They think joy is something that comes from the world. Good music, good food, good company, good experiences. But almost all of what we call joy is just relief from some internal tension that was building up. Relief from loneliness when someone gives you attention. Relief from hunger when you eat. Relief from boredom when a new distraction appears. Relief from insecurity when someone praises you. These are not wrong, but they are unstable. They are joys that depend on something being wrong first. They are joys born out of lack. And any joy that depends on lack can never be lasting. When a person begins to awaken, even faintly, even unintentionally, they start seeing the cracks in this whole structure. They begin to notice that the things which once excited them were actually forms of escape. The thrill wasn't pure joy, it was the temporary silence of an itch. And once you see through that game, the game doesn't work anymore. You can't unsee it, you can't unknow it. So when food suddenly tastes bland, when music feels lifeless, when nature doesn't move your soul like it once did, you're not malfunctioning. You're simply no longer hypnotized by the world's old tricks. You are stepping out of the psychological playground where the mind trains itself to run after moments of comfort, reward, sensation, and stimulation. And the moment you step out of that playground, there is an eerie silence. A silence that feels like emptiness. A silence the mind mistakes for numbness. But it's not numbness. It's withdrawal from a lifetime of being addicted to internal tension and external relief. You are not losing joy. You are losing addiction. You are losing the emotional roller coaster that kept your mind entertained but never fulfilled. And yes, losing that roller coaster feels like dying. Because for years, maybe decades, that roller coaster was your identity. You knew who you were based on the things you chased, the music you loved, the food you enjoyed, the people who pleased you, the passions that kept you moving. Now it's all dissolving like sand slipping through your hands. This transition is uncomfortable because your mind doesn't know how to exist without being entertained, without being stimulated. It doesn't know how to just be. So when the old sparks disappear, the mind goes into panic mode. It says, I'm broken, something is wrong, but nothing is wrong. For the first time in your life, you're not running. For the first time, you're not chasing. For the first time, there is no hunger manufacturing joy. For the first time, there is no loneliness manufacturing connection. For the first time, you are simply here. But because this is new, the mind interprets it as emptiness. Because this state doesn't come with flashing lights or emotional fireworks, the mind assumes it's the absence of life. But it's not the absence of life. It's the absence of noise. Imagine standing in a room full of candlelight. The flickering shadows on the walls keep you entertained. You think the shadows are the world because you've never seen anything else. But then someone opens the door. A wave of bright daylight floods in. It's too bright. It blinds you. Oh. It washes everything out until the room looks flat, colorless, stripped of all its shadows and dances, and you think something terrible has happened. I've lost the magic, you say. The shadows are gone, everything looks dull. But that dullness isn't the disappearance of reality. It's the disappearance of illusion. Your eyes just haven't adjusted yet. You are experiencing reality without the filters you used to depend on. And because you're not used to that level of clarity, it feels empty. It feels like nothing. But this is not nothing. This is the beginning of seeing clearly. Before, you lived in emotional candlelight. Beautiful, warm, but limited. Now you're stepping into the sun, not metaphorically, but psychologically. And sunlight is overwhelming when you've spent your life in the dim glow of internal cravings and external satisfactions. Your inner eyes are squinting. Your emotional skin is sensitive. Your old pleasures don't cast shadows anymore because they were shadows to begin with. They were comforts built on discomforts. The entire system collapses once you see it for what it is. And so now you're in a strange gap. No longer held by the old excitements, not yet familiar with the new quality of experience that's emerging. This gap is silent, uncomfortable, unsettling. It feels like floating between two worlds. It feels like losing identity, losing flavor, losing color. But you haven't lost anything real. You've only lost illusions. The mind doesn't know how to interpret this silence, so it calls it numbness. But it's not numbness, it's space. It's the undoing of psychological habits that have been running your life since childhood. And here's the strangest part. The more awakened you become, the more this silence reveals itself. You start to notice that most of your joy was actually tension relief. You start realizing that your desires were just strategies to escape the present moment. You start to see that the highs were only meaningful because the lows existed right beside them. And once the cycle collapses, you no longer feel the high because you're no longer feeding the low. This is not the loss of joy. This is the loss of drama. And without drama, the mind feels unemployed. It starts pacing like a restless animal. Give me something to chase, it says. Give me a desire. Give me a goal. Give me a fear. Give me a stimulation. And when you don't give it anything, it panics. That panic is what you are feeling right now. Not emptiness, not depression, withdrawal from a lifetime of overstimulation. Withdrawal from emotional dependence on external triggers. Withdrawal from the identity that was defined by what excited you. You are not dying. You are decoupling from illusion. You are not losing emotion. You are losing dependence on it. You are not failing. You are shedding. What comes after this silence is not old joy returning, but a new kind of experience emerging, one that doesn't come from filling a lack. But you won't understand that yet. Right now you're in the gap, in the in-between, in the dissolving stage. And the dissolving stage always feels like something is being taken away. But what's being taken away is only what you outgrew. And so you keep walking, half aware that every step forward is also a step deeper into yourself. Deeper into a space you used to avoid, deeper into the corners of your mind you once feared would swallow you whole. This is where the transformation becomes real, not in the grand declarations, not in the quiet promises you whisper to yourself on your better days, but in the silent, grinding evolution that happens when no one is watching, when the world has given you nothing to lean on except the weight of your own truth. You begin to understand that the very parts of you that felt too heavy, too intense, too overwhelming were never a mistake. They were the signals, the markers, the early warnings that your life was never meant to be lived on the surface. You were never meant to simply survive the noise. You were meant to hear what hides beneath it, and the deeper you move into this realization, the more it becomes clear that the world has trained you to shrink, to flatten your inner experience into something socially acceptable, something quiet enough not to disturb anyone else's illusions. But that shrinking came with a cost. It blinded you to the extraordinary intelligence inside your discomfort, the way your body tightens when you're in the wrong environment, the way your mind tries to pull you away from anything shallow, the way your emotions rise like warnings long before your logic can catch up. You're not broken for feeling too much. You're breaking open because you were never meant to fit the emotional limitations of people who stopped growing long ago. There comes a moment, subtle but irreversible, when you stop interpreting your intensity as instability and start seeing it as a different kind of perception, one that lets you sense truth the way other people sense temperature or light. You see patterns before they become visible, energy before it becomes action, deception before it becomes a wound. This awareness is not comfortable. It never will be. It stretches you, tests you, bends you into shapes you never trained for, but slowly, piece by piece, you begin to realize that this inner stretching is not torture. It's expansion. It's the widening of an internal horizon that was always there, dimly glowing behind the fog of your conditioning. And the fog begins to lift more aggressively now, like it suddenly knows it cannot hold its place in front of someone who has seen even a glimpse of what exists beyond it. You find yourself noticing things you used to ignore, your instincts sharpening, your attention becoming more precise, your tolerance collapsing not because you're angry, but because your system refuses to carry weight that no longer belongs to you. What once felt like weakness transforms into a peculiar grounded strength, the kind that doesn't roar or announce itself but stays centered, unwavering, impossible to manipulate. This is where the journey becomes dangerous, not because you are in danger, but because your clarity becomes a threat to the illusions of others. The moment you stop apologizing for your depth, people who benefit from your confusion will start to pull away. Not because you've changed too much, but because you've finally changed enough. Enough to stop playing small, enough to stop betraying your own intuition to make others comfortable. Enough to stop dimming your awareness so someone else's denial can continue uninterrupted. And with every person that fades from your life, something unexpected happens. You become lighter. The emptiness they leave behind becomes space. Space you didn't realize you needed. Space for thought, space for breath, space for the fuller version of you that could never stretch while surrounded by people who only understood fragments of you. At first, the silence feels unnatural, like a room stripped of furniture. But then it becomes breathable. Not the idealized version you imagined you would become, but the honest one. The one that admits its fears, stands with its doubts, moves forward even when it doesn't have all the answers. You start recognizing your emotional reactions as messages rather than flaws. You begin reading your discomfort like a map, your restlessness like a compass, your sensitivity like a kind of inner navigation system. The more you listen, the clearer it becomes that these parts of you were never your enemy. They were your guidance, misinterpreted through years of misunderstanding. There is a strange kind of beauty in this unfolding. Not a beauty that is meant to be admired, but a beauty that is meant to be lived. It shows up in the moments when you feel yourself choosing differently, responding with more truth, carrying yourself with more integrity, refusing to abandon yourself even in situations where you once would have. It shows up in the way you stop chasing validation and start valuing alignment. It shows up in the way you no longer tolerate conversations that drain you, relationships that diminish you, environments that suffocate you. You are not pushing these things away out of anger. You are simply outgrowing them, and this outgrowing accelerates quietly, almost invisibly. One day you realize the things that once hurt you no longer have the same power. The fears that once controlled you now feel smaller, thinner, easier to see through. The triggers that once sent you spiraling now dissolve with a single breath. It's not that they disappeared. It's that you finally understand them. You understand their origin, their patterns, their illusions. And once something is understood, it loses the ability to rule you. This is the point where life begins to align. Not all at once, not in some dramatic collapse and rebirth, but piece by piece, like an inner architecture rearranging itself into a version you always suspected existed, but never fully believed you could reach. And as this internal structure strengthens, everything external begins to respond. Opportunities shift, conversations shift, people shift. You attract different energy because you emit different energy. You move differently. Listen differently. You interpret differently. The world reacts to your consciousness the way gravity reacts to mass. It adjusts, and in this adjustment, you experience something you never expected, a sense of ease. Not the superficial ease of convenience or comfort, but the deep ease that comes from being aligned with yourself, from no longer negotiating your truth, from no longer carrying the weight of who you used to be. It's an ease that doesn't remove difficulty, but transforms your relationship to it. Challenges still arise, but you meet them with a presence that feels unfamiliar even to you. A presence born from depth, not from fear, from clarity, not from confusion, from truth, not from performance. And though you may not realize it yet, this is the moment your life begins to rewrite itself, not through force, not through effort, but through the quiet inevitability of someone who has finally stopped running from themselves. And as this rewriting unfolds, something inside you begins to settle in a way it never has before, not into complacency, not into routine, but into a deeper alignment, a sense of being internally anchored instead of drifting between expectations that were never yours to carry. It is an unfamiliar stability at first, almost suspicious in its quietness, as if you're waiting for the next collapse, the next emotional earthquake, the next moment life demands more from you than you feel capable of giving. But it doesn't come. Instead, what arrives is an expanding awareness that the chaos you used to experience wasn't your natural state. It was the result of living out of sync with yourself. And once you realize that, you can't unsee it. You can't pretend you don't know the cost of self-betrayal anymore. You can't return to the versions of you that silenced instinct for acceptance, that traded authenticity for belonging, that hid truth in exchange for temporary peace. You feel every compromise like a fracture, every denial like a crack, every old pattern trying to pull you back like an echo from a life you no longer fit inside. Yet instead of weakening you, these realizations make you sharper, more precise in your choices, more intentional in where you place your attention, your time, your energy. The world around you begins to respond to this precision. People who once overlooked your presence now feel unsettled by your clarity, as if your very being disrupts the comfortable fictions they've built their lives around. Some will distance themselves, some will try to pull you back into the familiar roles you played. Some will admire you quietly but never admit it, and a rare few will rise to meet you at the level you're moving toward. You start to understand that losing people is not always loss. Sometimes it is alignment, sometimes it is protection, sometimes it is the universe clearing a path you were too afraid to clear yourself. And as that path becomes clearer, you begin to walk differently, not faster, not louder, but with a certainty that feels rooted in something ancient within you, something that has waited years for you to finally hear it. You navigate life not from reaction, but from awareness. The noise that once overwhelmed you becomes information. The emotions that once scattered you become signals. The wounds that once defined you become gateways. You are no longer controlled by what happened to you. You are shaped by how you've chosen to rise from it. There comes a point where you notice your internal dialogue changing. The harshness softens. The fear quiets. The self-doubt loses its authority. You stop talking yourself like an enemy and start guiding yourself like someone worth protecting, worth understanding, worth evolving. Slowly, without even noticing when it happened, you stop being at war with yourself. It's not that every part of you suddenly aligns, it's that you finally stop fighting the parts that don't. You allow them space to exist without letting them take control. That balance is what transforms you. And in this transformation, you begin to reclaim a sense of power you didn't know you had lost. Not the superficial kind that demands attention or recognition, but the internal kind that doesn't need validation to know it's real. A power that stays even when you're exhausted. A power that speaks even when you're silent. A power that moves even when you remain still. You feel it in the way you no longer chase after what isn't meant for you. You feel it in the way you walk away from anything that dilutes you. You feel it in the way you hold your boundaries without rage, without explanation, without guilt. From this place, your perception of life shifts again. You begin to see that much of what you once called connection was actually attachment. Much of what you once called loyalty was fear. Much of what you once called love was self-abandonment dressed as devotion. And as painful as these realizations can be, they free you. They allow you to build connections from truth rather than need, from alignment rather than loneliness, from choice rather than habit. You start valuing the people who meet you with depth, who speak with honesty, who carry awareness in their presence. These are the ones who feel like breathing, like grounding, like recognition. But with deeper recognition comes deeper responsibility. The responsibility to no longer let your life be shaped by unconscious motives. You notice the old impulses rising sometimes, the urge to dim yourself, the reflex to please, the habit of shrinking your truth so others won't feel threatened. But now you catch them, you observe them, you realize you were never fragile, you were simply carrying too much of what wasn't yours. And as you release what was never meant to stay, what truly belongs to you begins to approach. Not in dramatic bursts, not in cinematic waves, but in quiet, unmistakable moments. Tiny alignments, subtle confirmations, gentle shifts that tell you you're in the right place at the right time, becoming the right version of yourself. You begin to trust these moments more than the chaos that once defined your inner world. You start reading synchronicities not as coincidences, but as signals guiding you towards something larger than your old life could contain. This is where life begins to open. Not all at once, but steadily, like dawn breaking through the last layer of night. You start to feel pulled instead of pushed, guided instead of burdened, aligned instead of scattered. You no longer feel the need to prove your worth because your existence itself begins to feel like proof. You move with an internal authority that doesn't require permission. Your steps become intentional, your choices become cleaner, your path becomes clearer, and even when confusion returns, it no longer terrifies you. It simply signals that something in you is ready to expand again. And with every expansion, you meet a new version of yourself, a version that carries more truth, a version that holds more awareness, a version that refuses to return to the emotional poverty you once normalized. You see now that the world is not asking you to be more or less than you are. It is asking you to be fully yourself. Not the edited version, not the safe version, not the softened version, but the whole one. The one who feels deeply, the one who sees clearly, the one who transforms relentlessly, the one who refuses to betray their own evolution for the comfort of remaining the same. You walk forward, not because you know exactly where you're going, but because you finally trust the place you're walking from. And that trust becomes the most powerful thing you carry. It becomes the force that shapes your days, the compass that shapes your decisions, the quiet strength that shapes your entire becoming. And as that trust becomes the quiet engine behind your every movement, you begin to realize that you no longer operate from the fractured logic of survival. You operate from a deeper intelligence, an intelligence that doesn't ask what is safe, but what is true. You start noticing how every step you take now feels less like an attempt to escape something and more like a deliberate movement toward something. Even if you can't fully articulate it, the direction feels real, alive, magnetic. There is a steadiness in you now that wasn't there before. Not the steadiness that comes from knowing all the answers, but from no longer fearing the unknown. You understand that certainty was never the source of peace. Alignment was. And alignment doesn't require conditions to be perfect. It only requires you to be present. Present with yourself, present with your path, present with the quiet force pulling you into a life you once thought you were unworthy of. The world around you hasn't suddenly become easier. What has changed is the way you inhabit it. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of drift. You feel instead of suppress. You move with a kind of internal gravity that keeps you from scattering into pieces the way you once did. And people can sense this. They feel it before they understand it. Some will be inspired by it, some intimidated, some confused, and some quietly transformed just by being in your presence. Because when a person begins to live from truth instead of fear, they become a reminder to everyone else that their own truth is waiting. You begin to recognize the subtle layers of your own evolution. The way you no longer rush to fill silence. The way you no longer cling to connections that drain you. The way you no longer accept half-heartedness from yourself or anyone else. You begin to carry yourself with a kind of sacred refusal. A refusal to shrink. A refusal to settle. A refusal to abandon your own expansion for the comfort of familiarity. It's not arrogance. It's self-respect awakening after years of being buried under compromise. And through this awakening, you reclaim something even deeper, your capacity for joy. Not the mechanical joy you once manufactured to seem okay, but a joy that arises naturally from being in alignment with your own existence. It comes quietly at first, through small moments, forgotten sensations, glimpses of light that appear when you least expect them, a breath that feels easier, a morning that feels softer, a conversation that feels meaningful, a moment of solitude that feels like belonging instead of loneliness. These are the signals of your becoming. As this joy slowly rebuilds itself inside you, you begin to understand that your life was never meant to be a constant struggle. The struggle was a symptom of misalignment, not your identity. You see that suffering was the language your soul used to get your attention, to push you toward truth, to pull you away from everything that was too small for your unfolding. And now that you can finally hear yourself clearly, the suffering begins to loosen its grip, not because pain disappears forever, but because you now meet pain with awareness instead of fear. You can sit with it, understand it, transform it, release it. In this clarity, you also begin to understand why your past had to happen the way it did. Every loss, every disappointment, every ending, every silence, every collapse, none of it was a punishment. It was preparation. It was dismantling every illusion you clung to, removing every layer that kept you from your own truth, dissolving every version of you that was built on fear. Your old life wasn't destroyed, it was peeled away. What remains now is not brokenness, but authenticity, not emptiness, but space, not weakness, but access to yourself, to life, to the deeper architecture of your own becoming. You feel yourself rising, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in the subtle, undeniable way a seed rises through soil. Quietly, persistently, unstoppably. You rise because you were always meant to rise, because everything you've lived through has been carving you into someone capable of rising, someone who understands themselves, someone who doesn't run from discomfort but listens to it, someone who doesn't fear change but embraces it, someone who doesn't cling to identity but evolves continuously. As this rising continues, you begin to see the world differently. Opportunities that once felt unreachable now feel like natural extensions of your path. Conversations you once avoided now flow effortlessly. Dreams you once dismissed now feel possible. You become someone who no longer negotiates against their own potential, someone who no longer hides their intelligence, their depth, their sensitivity, their vision. You begin to live not in reaction to the world, but in creation of your place within it. Your presence becomes a message, not because you're trying to send one, but because your alignment radiates outward. People who cross your path feel it, even if they can't explain it. Your calm unsettles those who survive on chaos. Your clarity exposes the illusions others rely on. Your authenticity disrupts the narratives people use to hide from themselves. That is the quiet power of becoming whole. It speaks without speaking. It influences without intention. It transforms without force. But the greatest transformation happens within you. A point comes where you realize you don't just understand yourself. You trust yourself completely. You trust your instincts, your intuition, your boundaries, your direction. You trust the timing of your life. You trust the unfolding of your path. You trust the strength that carried you through darkness and the wisdom that grew out of it. You trust the voice inside you that once felt too faint to follow, but now feels too powerful to ignore. And at the height of this trust, something profound happens. You finally return to yourself, not the self shaped by expectation or fear or survival, not the self altered to please others, not the self dulled by exhaustion or insecurity, but the self that has always been underneath everything, waiting, watching, holding the truth of who you are. This return is not explosive. It's quiet, it's deep, it's sacred. It's the moment you stop searching for yourself in the world and start recognizing yourself in your own presence. It's the moment you realize you were never lost. You were simply unfolding. You were never broken. You were becoming. You were never behind. You were being prepared. And this is where the conclusion begins to form. Not as an ending, but as a realization. You see now that your evolution was not accident. Your awakening was not coincidence. Your transformation was not luck. It was intelligence. It was necessity. It was the blueprint your soul carried from the beginning. You were meant to outgrow the life you once settled for. You were meant to question everything that felt false. You were meant to break apart so you could break open. You were meant to lose the version of yourself that was built on fear so you could become the version built on truth. Your journey was never about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And that remembrance is the beginning of every real power you will ever hold. Because now, after everything you've survived, everything you've shed, everything you've rebuilt, you are no longer living unconsciously. You are no longer abandoning yourself. You are no longer pretending you don't know what alignment feels like. You feel you understand, and with that understanding comes the final truth. You are ready now, ready to walk into the life that matches your depth, ready to speak with the voice that once trembled, ready to rise with the strength you earned, ready to create from the clarity you fought for, ready to embody the person you were always meant to become. This is not the end of your journey. It is the moment you finally begin living it. Awake, aligned, whole, and utterly unafraid of the magnitude of who you are becoming.